All right, we'd like to welcome Senator Roy Blunt, who flew in from Washington, D.C. today to the real Washington, Washington, Missouri.
Exactly.
To meet with constituents on a number of issues this Friday. The Senator was kind enough to stop by the emissourian.com studio to answer some questions. We appreciate this and your interest in our community, Senator. Welcome.
It's good to be here.
Okay. You acknowledged yesterday in an interview that Washington is broke. Congressional approval ratings would bear that out, with some surveys showing Congress's approval rating hovering somewhere around 10%. Yesterday we saw on C-SPAN Senator McCain and Senator Schumer trading barbs over a comment Senator McCain made regarding Long Island. It all seems petty to us in the heartland, especially when there are so many serious issues confronting our country. You're a student of history. You've been in Washington for a number of years. Is the partisanship and gridlock the worst you've ever seen?
Well, the worst you've ever seen, Bill, is an interesting qualifier. What's the worst I've ever seen is the inability to get anything done. So I guess the gridlock is the worst I've ever seen. Partisanship sort of comes and goes, and when I was the whip in the House, the majority whip in the House, we passed two bills in 10 years that didn't have Democrats vote for them. And sometimes there weren't very many Democrats, but it always took a few Democrats to be with the Republican majority at that time to get things done. And so it's just a process where you have to reach out, you have to find enough common ground to get things done. And I think one of our problems, even from the point of view of Washington, Missouri, as opposed to Washington, D.C., is some sense that, well, compromise is a terrible thing. Compromise is actually the essence of democracy. Unless you get everything your way, it's a compromise. Democracy particularly is full of compromises. As far as I know, there's never been a perfect bill, because there's never been a law passed that I wrote that I was the only one that had to vote for, that I was the one who could sign into law. And so I do think we're having a big debate now, as I told people here at the City Hall today, about who we're going to be for the next 25 or 30 years. And when that happens in the history of the country, the government essentially almost stops, because it can't bear the weight of that huge debate, whether it's 1980 or 1800, where Jefferson saw the government differently than Washington and Adams had. And it was a really tough election. And the government didn't do much for a while, but then for the next 28 years, if you look at the history books, we talk about Jeffersonian America, because we made a big decision and then moved forward. I think we're making a big decision in the next year about who we're going to be for a long time. So I think this year and this debate is more important than a lot of the debates we have year in and year out are.
All right, can you give us a couple of examples of some issues that there could be some breakthrough with Republicans and Democrats that they might be able to compromise on?
Well, there are a number of bills that I'm co-sponsoring with Democrats. One would be the Main Street Fairness Act, where this would just say that if you buy things over the internet, there's no tax for using the internet, but you've got to pay the sales tax that the law in Missouri and 35 other states requires you to pay. And the internet merchant, unless they're a small business that does less than $500,000 worth of that kind of sales a year, the internet merchant has to collect that tax. Hopefully we'll have an energy and water bill come to the floor next week. On the ag appropriations bill that I'm the ranking Republican on, obviously the chairman and I had to work hard to find where we're going to take the 5% in cuts that we took in almost every ag program. And at the same time, we were able to keep ag research and FDA funding and a few things that between us we thought were critically important that we keep at the 2011 levels, at those levels. But I do think the big question that will be the backdrop for that debate over the next couple of decades will be, are we going to be more like Europe or less like Europe? I think the president wants to look at the Western European model and make that the model for America, and I don't. And we'll see what voters say about that in November of next year. I think that's the single biggest question in the presidential election. Are we going to move in that direction? Or are we going to say, no, that's not who we want to be. We want to be who we are. We want to be a country where the government doesn't take over all the challenges of life, but it also doesn't get all the opportunities of life.
Last night, Senator, you voted against a bill that would extend the payroll tax. Can you tell us why you
I voted against it twice. I voted against the Republican plan and I voted against the Democrat plan.
Tell us why you voted the way you did.
I think even it's very shrewd of the president and others to start calling it the payroll tax. 10 years ago, we would have called it the Social Security contribution. We've had this Social Security contribution holiday for a year now, and it just simply didn't make a difference. It didn't create jobs, it didn't spur the economy on, but it did cost the Social Security Fund $146 billion. And I think it's a mistake, and I think the further you go down that road, the more likely you are that we'll never get back to the contribution level that people should be making and have traditionally made. And then Social Security becomes kind of it's just another government benefit. We pay in some, but we borrow some money to run it, and we use general revenue to run it. That will destroy Social Security in the end if we let that continue. I think it's a bad idea, and I'm not for continuing it.
Even today, there is some discussion about compromise on this issue. Do you see anything, any movement forward on this issue?
My guess is that we continue to do what we've been doing for the last year. I'm just not going to be for it.
In the past, earmarks have been used for specific projects, including specific transportation projects like new bridges. The gentleman you replaced, Senator Blunt, is responsible for a new bridge in Herman. We are seeking, trying to find funding sources for a new bridge in Washington. Would an earmark ever be appropriate for something like that?
Well, I've always said that it's appropriate for members of Congress to decide how to spend some of the money rather than saying we're going to let the president decide how to spend all the money. I think Senator Bond knew a lot more about Herman, Missouri than President Obama or President Bush, and I do too. And if you can make that case and you're willing to defend it and it's transparent and open and fully debated, this is with any kind of limited resources, and you always have limited resources, the world works on people making choices. And to some extent, this is a decision about whether the President of the United States makes all the choices, which the founders would have never thought was appropriate, or the Congress makes all or at least some of the choices. One of the advocates for earmarks is Ron Paul, who says that the Congress should earmark everything because that's what the Constitution envisioned. The Congress would say to the President, here's how you spend the money, and your job as the executive is to go out and do these projects. That he says the Congress is wrong if they say to the President, here's all the money we want to spend for highways, but you decide what highways to spend it on. And so it's a legitimate difference of opinion, I guess. But I'm going to fight for the things that are good for Missouri in whatever context. If that's the overall fund for ag research or levee restoration, or if we get to a moment when, again, we can advocate why the bridge at Washington, Missouri may matter more than the bridge at Cincinnati, Ohio, I'd be glad to be up there trying to make that case that the Washington, Missouri bridge is the one that's most needed, if it is. And if it's not, then we ought to use that federal money to build a bridge that's more needed somewhere else.
Last question. Former Senator John Danforth from Missouri made some interesting comments about the presidential field this week. I don't know if you heard any of them. Basically disparaging the field in some instances because of the tone of some of the debate and conversations. Have you endorsed any of the candidates, and if so, why?
Well, I have, and actually Senator Danforth's endorsing the candidate today that I've endorsed, Governor Romney, and I think the debates have been pretty good. I know that Senator Danforth's view was that there were a lot of things said that didn't make perfect sense in the debate, but I think there were a lot of things said that did make good sense, and it's given the American people a chance to look at these Republican candidates and narrow them down to possibly the two who are have the most answers and the deepest thought on those answers. At this moment, former Speaker Gingrich and former Governor Romney, and we'll just see how that goes. But I don't have the same view of the debates as my good friend Jack Danforth, but apparently I do have the same view which of the Republican candidates is most likely to be elected if they're the nominee.
Thank you.
Good to see you.